Bangkok, 1972. The training camp had been operating for 30 years before Bruce Lee walked through its gates. 30 years of producing fighters who won. Not tournament fighters, not demonstration artists, not the kind of practitioners whose credentials lived on paper and certificate. Fighters who stood in the ring at Lumpini Stadium and Rajadamnern and came home with the outcome decided in their favor. The camp had a reputation that the Thai fighting community built and maintained the way serious communities maintain serious reputations, through the testimony of people who had been in the room, through the results that appeared on scoreboards, through the specific quality of silence that fell over opposing camps when they learned which gym a fighter had come from. The head trainer was a man named Kru Prasong. He was 60 years old. He had been training fighters since he was 20, which meant he had been training fighters for 4 decades, which meant he had seen everything, every style, every claim, every foreign practitioner who arrived in Bangkok with a reputation from somewhere else, and the specific confidence of someone who had never been tested by a Muay Thai fighter at competition level. He had seen all of them. He had learned to read them in the first 30 seconds of watching them move. On a Tuesday morning in March 1972, he watched Bruce Lee walk through the camp's gates and spent 30 seconds reading him. Then he turned to his senior fighter, a 26-year-old named Somchai, who had won 41 of his 47 professional bouts, whose left kick had ended 7 careers, and said something in Thai. Somchai laughed. What Kru Prasong said, translated, was, "This one is different. Don't use the kick first." Bruce Lee was in Bangkok for the same reason he had been in Guangzhou and Tokyo and San Francisco, not for a film, not for a public appearance, for the question that had organized his professional life since he was 19 years old. What is the most efficient way to stop a human being? Muay Thai in 1972 was not what Western martial arts communities knew it as. It had not yet been exported and packaged and made available through gyms on every continent. In 1972, it was still what it had always been, a fighting system developed over centuries by people who needed it to work, refined through competition that was real and consequences that were real, producing practitioners who were among the most battle-tested on the planet. Bruce Lee had read everything available about Muay Thai in English and Chinese. He had watched footage, limited, poor quality, but sufficient to understand the structural principles. He had trained against the leg kick with Dan and Asanto in preparation. He understood going in that he was entering a system that was specifically evolved to defeat the approaches he had spent 15 years refining. Muay Thai's leg kick attacked the root, the foundation, the thing that everything else was built on. You could not slip a leg kick the way you slipped a jab. The mechanics were different, the target was different, the response required was different. A practitioner whose system was built around maintaining a mobile base and reading weight before it became movement was facing an attack that specifically targeted the mobility and the base simultaneously. He understood this. He came to understand it better. And to find out whether what he had been developing, the water practice, the chain before the chain, the dissolution of the organizational moment, held against something that was specifically designed to destroy the kind of practitioner he was. The meeting had been arranged through a contact in the Thai film industry. Bruce Lee was in Bangkok for legitimate production meetings, the early stages of international co-production discussions that would eventually feed into the constellation of projects around Enter the Dragon. The meetings were real, the production context was real. The conversation with Kru Prasong's camp was arranged for a Tuesday morning when no production meetings were scheduled. 5 people came from Bruce Lee's side, himself, a Thai-speaking contact in Hui Road who served as translator and intermediary, and 3 people who over the decades remain unnamed in every account of that morning. The camp had, in addition to Kru Prasong and Somchai, 7 other fighters present, some training, some observing, some who had come specifically because word had reached them that a practitioner from Hong Kong was coming to the camp on Tuesday morning. Hui Road had been careful about how the visit was framed, not a challenge, not a demonstration, a learning visit, a practitioner who wanted to understand Muay Thai at its authentic level, who had come with respect and wanted to engage honestly. Kru Prasong accepted this framing. He was not interested in demonstrations. He was interested in honest engagement. The distinction mattered to him in the way that it mattered to all the people Bruce Lee had found worth seeking out: Jen Wei Ming in Guangzhou, Yuki Tanaka in Tokyo, Sensei Park in San Francisco. The practitioners who had built real things in real conditions and had no patience for anything that was not also real. He welcomed them into the camp with the courteous efficiency of a man who has learned that the quality of a meeting is determined in the first 5 minutes. Then he watched Bruce Lee for 30 seconds, and told Somchai not to use the kick first. The camp occupied a compound on the outskirts of Bangkok, not far from the city's noise but separated from it by distance and walls, and the specific atmosphere of a place that has been used for one serious purpose for a long time. Heavy bags, some worn to the point of shape loss, hung from wooden frames.
A ring occupied the center of the main space, not the elevated ring of a stadium but a ground-level practice ring, the ropes weathered and slightly loose from use. The floor of the training area was packed earth, covered in places with worn matting. Everything in the camp was functional. Nothing was decorative. The equipment showed the specific kind of wear that comes from daily use over years, not neglect, the wear of things that are used properly. Bruce Lee walked through the space with the assessment mode he brought to every new environment, taking inventory, noting the distances, the surfaces, the relationship between the structures, reading the room. Kruper Song walked beside him, we wrote translating the older man's commentary, the history of the camp, the philosophy of the training, the specific qualities that Muay Thai required from its practitioners. Bruce Lee listened. He asked questions through WeWrote, specific, technical questions, that Kruper Song answered with the pleased precision of an expert whose expertise is being engaged at the correct level. What is the relationship between the leg kick and the clinch in competition strategy? Kruper Song, the leg kick creates the condition for the clinch creates the condition for the knee creates the condition for the finish. Nothing is isolated. Everything feeds the next thing. At what point in the chain is the leg kick most dangerous? Kruper Song looked at him for a moment before answering through WeWrote. He says this is the right question. He says that most foreign practitioners who visit ask how to defend the kick. You asked how to read it before it is thrown. He says this tells him something about how you think. Bruce Lee said, what does it tell him? WeWrote translated. Kruper Song responded. He says it tells him you have been in rooms where the kick was not the problem, where the beginning of the kick was the problem. Bruce Lee looked at Kruper Song. Yes, he said. They worked for the first hour without contact. Kruper Song had Somchai demonstrate, slowly, with explanation, the technical mechanics of the teep, the leg kick, the clinch entry, the knee strike, not as performance, as honest technical transfer, the kind of teaching that happens between serious people who have agreed to be honest with each other. Bruce Lee watched with the quality of attention that the Taipei students had described in their accounts of the afternoon with Feng Wei, the whole body watching, every sensory system taking simultaneous notes. He asked to see each technique repeated, at half speed, then at three-quarter, then full. He watched the leg kick at full speed 3 times. He found the shoulder announcement on the second repetition, not in Somchai's shoulder, the hip, the weight transfer to the hip that preceded the leg kick's loading, that occurred perhaps 0.2 of a second before the kick itself became visible as a committed movement. He filed this. He asked to try defending the kick, not with a block, with the weight reading he had developed, attempting to read the hip transfer and respond before the kick committed. Somchai looked at Kruper Song. Kruper Song nodded. They squared off in the practice ring.
The first kick caught Bruce Lee on the outer thigh. Not full power. Somchai had been instructed to use 60%. But 60% of a professional Muay Thai leg kick at competition level is not a gentle introduction. The impact traveled through the thigh and into the hip and produced the specific jarring sensation that makes the leg kick effective. Not pain at the point of contact, but disruption of the structural relationship between the foot and the floor. Bruce Lee took 1 step sideways to redistribute his weight. He looked at Somchai. He reset. Again, he said. The second kick, he slipped, partially. He read the hip transfer and moved off the line, but the angle of his movement was slightly wrong and the kick's arc caught the edge of his thigh rather than missing entirely. Still contact, less than the first. He reset again. Again, he said. The third kick he was not there for. He had read the hip transfer at its origin, 0.2 of a second before the kick loaded, and moved off the line with the 45-degree diagonal step that had found him beside Feng Wei's committed advance, beside the Hapkido master in the dark room, in every position that the previous approach had been organized to prevent. Somchai's kick passed through empty air. Bruce Lee was beside Somchai's lead hip, inside the kick's recovery position, at the range where the Muay Thai clinch lives, the distance that is Somchai's territory, the distance that Muay Thai has been refining for centuries. He did not enter the clinch. He stepped back. Reset. The camp was very quiet. Kruper Song had been watching from outside the ring. He watched the 3 kicks with the expression of a man receiving data that is updating a model he has been building for 40 years. The first kick landing, expected, standard result for a first encounter with the leg kick. The second kick partially avoided, faster than expected, significant. The third kick missing entirely. He turned to the fighter standing beside him, a veteran named Arthit who had trained at the camp for 15 years, and said 1 word in Thai. Arthit's eyebrows went up. The word Kruper Song had said, translated, was earlier. He had watched Bruce Lee read the hip transfer at its origin. He had seen the movement begin before the kick had committed. He had been training fighters for 40 years and he had seen defensive reading at high levels, had trained it, had drilled it, had built entire camp sessions around developing the ability to read the kick before it arrived. He had not seen it read that early. 0.2 of a second earlier than the level his best students operated at. He called to Weiroch. Ask him, Kruper Song said, through Weiroch, to Bruce Lee, what he read, where he read it from. Bruce Lee looked at Kruper Song. The hip,
he said. Before the loading, the weight transfers to the hip before the kick loads. If I read the weight transfer, I have the kick's direction and approximate timing before it has committed. Wee Roach translated. Kruper Song was quiet for several seconds. Then he said something that Wee Roach translated with the careful precision of someone conveying something important accurately. He says he has been teaching his fighters to read the knee. The knee amounts as the loading. He says he did not know someone could read the hip. He says the hip is earlier than the knee. He says you are reading something that is earlier than what he teaches his best fighters to read. Bruce Lee said, the knee is the announcement. The hip is the chain before the announcement. Kruper Song received this through Wee Roach. He looked at Bruce Lee for a long moment. Then he stepped into the ring himself. Kruper Song was 60 years old. His fighting days were behind him, had been behind him for 2 decades. But the thing that does not leave a man who has trained correctly for 40 years is the structural understanding, the body's knowledge of how force works and where it lives and what precedes it. He stood in the ring across from Bruce Lee. Not to fight. To demonstrate. He moved through the leg kick sequence at slow speed, showing Bruce Lee the hip transfer, the knee loading, the commitment, the delivery, but with a quality of attention to his own movement that was different from Somchai's demonstration. He was narrating with his body, making visible the internal sequence that his 40 years had made automatic and invisible. Bruce Lee watched with complete staleness. At the end of the demonstration, Kruper Song said through Wee Roach, you found the hip. There is something earlier than the hip. Bruce Lee looked at him. Show me, he said. Kruper Song moved the sequence again. Slower. The breath, Wee Roach translated as Kruper Song moved. Before the hip, the breath changes. The diaphragm engages for the kick's power generation before the hip transfers the weight. If you read the breath, you are earlier than the hip. Bruce Lee was completely still. The breath. Earlier than the hip. In the notebook that would be found in a desk drawer, in the entries that documented morning 47, morning 83, morning 119 of working the organizational moment, and all 3 years of 515 practice, he had read the weight, had worked the shoulder, had worked the hip. He had not, until this moment, been pointed toward the breath. He stood in a Muay Thai training camp in Bangkok in 1972 and understood that the chain before the chain had one more link than he had found. He said to Wee Roach, to convey to Kruper Song, how long did it take you to learn to read the breath? Wee Roach translated the response. He says he cannot read it reliably. He says he has glimpsed it. He says he has been trying to teach it for 20 years and has produced 2 fighters who could do it sometimes. He says it may not be teachable. He says it may only be findable. Bruce Lee looked at the 60-year-old man across the ring. The chain before the chain has one more link, he said. Wee Roach translated. Kruper Song nodded once. Then he said something that Wee Roach translated with the same careful precision as before. He says this is why he has been training for 40 years. Because each decade he finds one more link. He says he does not know how many links there are. He says he suspects the chain has no beginning. The first real exchange happened in the afternoon. By the time it occurred, 4 hours had passed. 4 hours of demonstration, of technical conversation, of the specific back and forth that 2 serious practitioners engage in when they have agreed to be honest with each other. The camp's fighters had cycled through their training, departed for rest, returned. Kruper Song had maintained his position as observer and occasional demonstrator throughout. The exchange was proposed by Somchai. Not aggressively. With the direct honesty of a professional who has been watching a very long technical conversation and wants to know what happens when the theory meets the full reality. He spoke to Kruper Song in Thai. Kruper Song looked at Bruce Lee through Wee Roach. He wants to spar, real speed. Not demonstration. He says. Wee Roach paused, ensuring accuracy. He says the only way to know if what you have been developing holds at real speed is to test it at real speed. He says controlled testing is not testing. He says you know this. Bruce Lee looked at Somchai. Somchai was 26 years old. 41 professional wins. The left kick that had ended 7 careers. He stood in the ring with the composed readiness of a man for whom real speed in a ring was the most ordinary state in the world. Bruce Lee looked at Kruper Song. The same rule as this morning. No damage. Contact confirmed and released. If either of us reaches a position, we acknowledge it and reset. Kruper Song received this through Wee Roach. He nodded. He said something to Somchai in Thai. Somchai nodded. They squared off.
The camp went quiet. Not the performance quiet of a crowd holding its breath for drama. The functional quiet of practitioners who have stopped their own work because what is about to happen in that ring is more instructive than whatever they were doing. 7 fighters arranged themselves along the ring's edges. Kruper Song stood at the corner, arms folded, face carrying the specific quality of a man who has been waiting for this moment since he watched Bruce Lee slip the 3rd kick. Wee Roach stood near the gate. He was not a fighter. He was a translator. But he had been in that camp for 4 hours, and something had happened to his understanding of what he was witnessing. It had clarified, from the vague sense that this was significant to the precise sense that this was unrepeatable, and he intended to be present for every second of it. Somchai in his stance. Weight distributed in the specific Muay Thai configuration that 47 professional fights had made as natural as standing. Both hands up, chin down. The settled, organized readiness of someone for whom a ring is home. Bruce Lee in his bladed position, lead hand extended, weight carrying the quality that the witnesses in every room before this one had tried and failed to adequately describe. The quality of readiness without preparation, available in all directions without being committed to any of them. 10 feet between them. Somchai opened with the teep. The front push kick, not the leg kick, not the power weapon, the range management tool, sent to test Bruce Lee's reaction to an attack that comes from the front rather than the side, that targets the center rather than the foundation, that carries different information than the leg kick in its approach pattern. Bruce Lee read it. He deflected it, not with a block, with a downward parting of his lead hand that redirected the kick's trajectory toward the floor, converting its forward energy into a downward arc. Light contact on his lead forearm, the kick spent itself on the deflection rather than on his center. He was already moving as the deflection happened, forward into the outside, the same diagonal that had become the answer to every committed attack, the position that was beside rather than in front, inside the committed line where the recovery is slow. He touched Somchai's right ribs, confirmed, released, reset. The 7 fighters along the ropes made no sound. Somchai recalibrated. He had felt the speed before, had felt it in the morning's technical work. But technical work at deliberate pace and real speed in a ring were different registers of the same information, and the real speed version was arriving now with a completeness that the deliberate pace had only suggested. He adjusted. He came forward, not with a single committed attack but with the Muay Thai combination approach that he had built 41 professional wins on. Teep to create range, teep again to establish rhythm, then the leg kick delivered into the rhythm's third beat where the defender has begun to anticipate the teep and is not organized for the low attack. The first teep, deflected, the same parting motion, less arm movement than before, more efficient. Bruce Lee was learning the deflection in real time, making it smaller with each repetition, the way the notebook's entries moved from morning 47 to morning 83 to morning 119, the same problem becoming more resolved with each engagement. The second teep, deflected again, but this time Bruce Lee moved with the deflection, same diagonal but closer to Somchai's body, inside the teep's range rather than outside it. The third beat. The leg kick. Somchai's left hip began the transfer, the weight moving to the hip before the knee loaded, the sequence that Bruce Lee had been reading all morning, 0.2 of a second before the kick committed. Bruce Lee read the hip. He moved. But Somchai had been told by Kruper Song before the session not to use the kick first, and Kruper Song had told him this precisely because he had read Bruce Lee's movement in the morning session and understood something. Somchai had changed the kick's trajectory mid-load. Not a different kick, the same kick, but the targeting adjusted in the 0.2 of a second between the hip transfer and the commitment, angling toward Bruce Lee's new position rather than the position he had originally occupied. The kick found Bruce Lee's outer thigh. Not full power, 70% by Somchai's later account. But the targeting had been adjusted after the hip transfer, adjusted at the point that Bruce Lee had been reading, which meant that reading the hip had not been sufficient. Bruce Lee took the kick, 3 steps sideways, redistributing weight. His face showed nothing except the honest accounting of a system that has received new data and is processing it. He reset. He looked at Somchai. He looked at Kruper Song. The trajectory changed after the hip, he said through Weroid. Kruper Song said, yes. He adjusted the targeting after I read the hip and moved. Yes. Which means reading the hip gives me the general direction but not the precise targeting. Yes, Kruper Song said. The hip tells you the kick is coming in the primary line. It does not tell you the final angle if the fighter can adjust after the load. Bruce Lee was quiet for a moment. The breath, he said. Kruper Song looked at him. If the breath is earlier than the hip, Bruce Lee said slowly, and if the breath carries the intent before the adjustment is possible. Kruper Song said something rapidly in Thai to Weroid. Weroid translated. He says this is the question he has been working on for 20 years. He says the breath carries the original intent before the fighter has decided to change it. You're reading the first intention, Bruce Lee said, before the second intention overrides it. Kruper Song received this. He was quiet for several seconds. Then he said something that Weroid translated with a careful expression of someone conveying something that matters. He says in 40 years he has never heard it described that way. He says you have described what he has been trying to teach for 20 years in one sentence. They went again. This time Bruce Lee was attempting to read the breath. Not the hip, the breath, the diaphragm engagement that preceded the hip transfer, that preceded the knee loading, that preceded the kick commitment. The earliest link in the chain, the one that carried the first intention before the adjustment was possible. The first repetition, he missed it. The kick landed, absorbed, redistributed, 3 steps sideways. He had been reading the hip again from habit. The second repetition, he caught something, not the breath itself, a quality of the stillness before the breath, the moment when the body's preparation for the breath was visible as a fractional change in Somchai's chest and shoulder. He moved a half beat earlier than the hip would have moved him. The kick caught the edge of his thigh rather than the full outer surface. Progress. The third repetition, he was reading something new, not the breath, not the hip, something between them, a change in Somchai's weight distribution at the foot level, a micro-adjustment of the back foot that occurs as the diaphragm engaged and before the hip transferred. The back foot. Earlier than the breath. 3 seconds. In 3 seconds, everything that followed happened. Somchai's back foot made its micro-adjustment. Bruce Lee was already moving, not the 45-degree diagonal but a straightforward step, into the space that the kick's loading was vacating on Somchai's left side. The kick loaded and committed to the space where Bruce Lee had been. It arrived into air.
Bruce Lee was inside the kick's arc, at the range of the Muay Thai clinch. He did not take the clinch. He placed his hands on Somchai's shoulders, light contact, the demonstration of access, and held them there for 1 second. Then he stepped back. The camp was completely silent. Somchai stood in the ring. His kick had committed fully. His talons was in the process of recovering from a kick that had landed on nothing. He stood on one foot in a specific vulnerable position that every Muay Thai fighter is most exposed in, the completion of a committed kick that has found empty air, with Bruce Lee's hands having just been damaged on his shoulders. He looked at Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee looked at him. The back foot, Bruce Lee said. Somchai understood this without translation. He looked down at his own back foot.
Krupa Song was in the ring before either fighter spoke again. He had ducked through the ropes with the surprising ease of a 60-year-old man whose body still remembered how to move in a ring, and he stood between the two practitioners with his eyes on Bruce Lee's face. He said something in Thai. Wiraj translated. He says he did not teach the back foot. He says he has never seen the back foot read. He says his best fighters, in 40 years, do not read the back foot. He says the back foot is below the breath. He says you found something below what he told you existed. Bruce Lee looked at Krupa Song. You told me the chain has no beginning, he said. I believed you. Wiraj translated. Krupa Song looked at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not the polite laugh of a social interaction, a genuine laugh. The helpless, full laugh of a man who has spent 40 years looking for something and has just watched someone younger find the next piece of it in an afternoon. He said something that Wiraj translated with a smile. He says he has been looking for the beginning of the chain for 40 years. He says you looked for 30 minutes. He says this is either very fast or very humbling, or possibly both. What followed was 2 more hours. Not sparring, not demonstration. The kind of technical exchange that the morning had been, and that the afternoon sparring had opened into a new register. 2 practitioners who had found a genuine shared question and were working on it together with the resources they had between them. Krupa Song had 40 years of Muay Thai and the specific, deep, competition-tested understanding of how force works in a system built around 8 weapons and the clinch, and the accumulated damage of professional fights at the highest level of the discipline. Bruce Lee had 15 years of Jeet Kune Do and the specific, deep, principle-tested understanding of how attention works, how the chain before the chain can be read earlier and earlier as the attention is trained to operate at finer and finer resolution. They had, between them, something neither had separately. Krupa Song brought the kicks, the leg kicks hip transfer, the knees loading announcement, the breath's original intent, and showed Bruce Lee what each of them felt like from the inside of the technique, not as a defender, as the practitioner producing the technique, feeling the internal sequence from within. This was the thing that changed Bruce Lee's understanding of what he had been building. He had been reading the chain from the outside, feeling the other practitioner's weight through the acoustic and tactile and vestibular information available to someone on the receiving end of an approach. He had become extraordinary at this. The hip reading, the shoulder reading, the weight reading that had found Ali's jab before it arrived, and Fong Wei's advance at the commitment point. But the chain from the inside, the experience of the technique from within the body generating it, contained information that outside reading could only approximate. Krupa Song walked him through the leg kick's internal sequence from the inside. The breath first, not consciously initiated, the body's automatic preparation for power generation. The diaphragm engages. This produces the microtension in the thoracic cavity that the back foot responds to with its weight adjustment. The back foot adjusts. This shifts the hip. The hip transfer loads the knee. The knee drives the kick. From the inside, the sequence was clear and sequential, and felt like exactly what it was, a chain, each link producing the next, the whole thing beginning with the breath and ending with the impact. From the outside, from the receiving position, the chain appeared to begin at the knee, or at the hip if you were reading at a high level, or at the back foot if you were reading at the level Bruce Lee had found that afternoon. The breath was invisible from the outside. Almost invisible. Almost, Bruce Lee said. He was quiet for a moment. If the breath produces a microtension in the thoracic cavity, he said through Wiraj, that microtension changes the practitioner's visual relationship to the space between us. The eyes shift very slightly. The focus changes as the body prepares for the movement. If I read the eyes rather than the back foot. He stopped himself. He was discovering something in real time. The eyes shift before the breath commits to the technique's intent. He said slowly, the eyes are reading me to find the target. The breath follows the breath. The back foot follows the breath. The hip follows the back foot. If I read the eyes. Krupa Song had been watching his face during this. He said something to Wiraj without waiting for the full translation to catch up. Wiraj said, he says you are describing something he has never described to anyone. He says in 40 years he has felt this but never found words for it. He says the eyes are the beginning of the chain. He says the eyes are the first intention. He says the fighter's eyes find the target before the fighter consciously decides to attack. And this is the earliest readable signal. The 2 men looked at each other across the ring. The eyes, Bruce Lee said. The eyes,
Cooper Song confirmed through Wiraj. The chain before the chain before the chain. They stayed until the light changed. The Bangkok afternoon moved through its stages, the high flat light of midday giving way to the angle of afternoon, then to the warm amber of a tropical evening approaching. The camp's fighters had long since finished their training. Most of them remained. They sat along the ropes and the walls, and the ground outside the ring, watching two men talk on a ring's floor with a translator between them, finding words for something that had spent decades existing only as physical knowledge. Nobody wanted to be somewhere else. When they finally parted, the bow, genuine and complete. Cooper Song and Bruce Lee facing each other at the ring center while 7 fighters watched from the edges. Cooper Song said something that Wiraj translated last. He says you came to learn Muay Thai. He says you did not learn Muay Thai. He says you learned something that Muay Thai pointed at. He says these are different things, and the second is more valuable. Bruce Lee received this. Tell him, he said, that he pointed at something I did not know the chain had. I came looking for the beginning, and he showed me there was no beginning. That is more valuable than anything I could have learned about the kicks. Wiraj translated. Cooper Song listened. He nodded once. He said something final. Wiraj smiled as he translated. He says come back in 10 years. He says in 10 years he will have found what is earlier than the eyes. He says he does not know what that is yet. He says he is looking forward to finding out.
The legend that the title of this story references is not the specific exchanges in that ring. It is the thing those exchanges produced, in Bruce Lee's understanding, in his practice, in the notebook that would be found in a desk drawer 16 months later, and in the tradition that Cooper Song carried forward in his camp for the 17 years he continued to train fighters after that Tuesday morning. The fighters who trained at Cooper Song's camp after 1972 describe a change in his teaching, a new element, not replacing the technical curriculum of 40 years, but added beneath it, like a foundation discovered under a foundation that was already solid, an insistence on reading the eyes, on finding what the eyes announced before the body acted, on training the attention to operate at the level where intention was still pre-verbal, still pre-physical, still a quality of focus rather than a committed movement. Several of his fighters, in the years after 1972, developed a reputation for reading attacks with an earliness that opposing camps described as uncanny. The Thai martial arts community discussed it with the same careful, person-to-person specificity that it used for all its serious reputations. Nobody connected it publicly to a Tuesday morning visit from a Hong Kong practitioner. The connections were made privately, later, by people who knew where to look. Here is what Bangkok 1972 actually was. 2 systems, one Eastern and ancient, built on centuries of competition and refined through the specific honesty of practitioners who needed it to work because their lives and livelihoods depended on it. One individual and modern, built on 15 years of obsessive reduction and principle testing by a man who processed everything as curriculum, meeting in a camp on the outskirts of a city and finding that they were asking the same question. Where does an attack begin? Not where does it land, not where does it commit. Where does it begin? Muay Thai had found the breath, had felt the back foot without naming it, had glimpsed the eyes without being able to teach the glimpse. Jeet Kune Do had found the weight shift, the shoulder, the hip, had been working on the organizational moment for 119 consecutive mornings. They were approaching the same answer from opposite directions. The answer, the eyes, the first intention, the moment when the body's attention finds the target before the conscious mind has decided to attack, was not in either system. It was in the space between them, in the conversation between a 60-year-old crew and a 32-year-old practitioner who had both been looking from different directions for the beginning of the chain. Neither found it that day. Both found the next link. That is what serious practice produces when it is honest and specific and relentlessly continued, not the destination, but the direction, not the answer, but a better question, not the end of the chain, but one more link toward where the chain begins. The chain has no beginning. Cooper Song had been right about that. But every morning, at 5:15, with a notebook and 2 minutes of urgent handwriting, you find one more link. That is enough. That is everything. The footage was never released. Because there was no footage. There was a ring on packed earth on the outskirts of Bangkok, and 7 fighters watching from the ropes, and a translator named Wiraj who carried the afternoon's words between 2 men who were asking the same question in different languages, and a back foot that moved before anyone was supposed to be able to read it, and a pair of eyes that moved before the back foot, and somewhere earlier than the eyes, something that neither man had named yet. The chain has no beginning, but it has a direction. And every morning that you look for the next link,
is a morning that moves you toward it.